The one reassurance you get when you finish a particularly scary horror movie is that it's okay because it's not real. Monsters and ghosts and the undead can't haunt you because they don't exist. So actually it's pretty horrifying when you're then led to believe that the risks you see are all too real, and the events you watched unfold on screen could happen to you at any time. So I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are 10 horror movies that were scarier for making you think they were real. 10. Lake Mungo. In the decade plus since its release, Australian mockumentary Lake Mungo has become a cult classic. It depicts a family attempting to come to terms with the death of their daughter, Alice. Ever since her drowning, the family home has taken on a lingering ghostly presence. Despite being unabashedly supernatural in nature, the film is constructed so as to appear real, using lo-fi video sources for the most part to capitalize on the eerie ambiguity of the imagery. Between the convincing performances of the cast and the spot-on docu-style format, Lake Mungo locks viewers in an anxious vice grip all the way to its gut-wrenching conclusion, ending with a haunting closing image which, while being objectively a work of fiction, is sure to linger in the mind long after. Though the film didn't have any sort of Blair Witch-esque marketing campaign pushing it as a real documentary, the technical and psychological plausibility of the piece make it feel real even in its more outlandish moments, and it's all the more chilling as a result. 9. Cannibal Holocaust. The infamous film follows a group of American anthropologists who head into the Amazon rainforest to locate a missing film crew. As you can imagine, this doesn't go well for them, and upon its release, many believed that Cannibal Holocaust was in fact a snuff film. This was largely a result of not only the film's believably gritty visual style and stunningly realistic gore effects, but also the fact that the cast had to sign contracts saying that they wouldn't appear in anything else until a year after the film's release. The film's director was subsequently brought into court in Italy on charges of obscenity and murder, requiring him to get the actors to come together for a TV interview and confirm their living status. In addition to this, he also had to show the court how certain special effects, namely the impalement scene, were achieved without harming anyone. Though the director was eventually cleared and sanctions against the film were lifted, Cannibal Holocaust remains hugely controversial today due to its real depictions of animal slaughter, and 4 decades on, it's not lost a shred of its queasy believability. 8. Noroi the Curse. Noroi the Curse is an expertly constructed mockumentary, revolving around the disappearance of documentary filmmaker character Masafumi Kobayashi as he makes his latest film. While the cast mainly consists of actors who will be relatively unknown to Western audiences, the movie doesn't need big stars to give it value. In fact, the film's realism benefits from its unknown cast. The film's production values feel entirely faithful to what you'd expect to see in an actual documentary. Even with a beefy 2-hour runtime, most of Noroi is defined by its thick atmosphere and lo-fi chills rather than over-the-top scare sequences. This is to the extent that if you stumbled across the movie on the TV in the early hours of the morning, you'd be forgiven for assuming it was an actual true crime doc. 7. Paranormal Activity. It cannot be underestimated just how buzzed about Paranormal Activity was ahead of its 2009 release. Marketed on the strength of its minimalist style, defined largely by handheld camera work and static night vision surveillance footage, critics gladly dubbed the film the new Blair Witch Project, and in a way, they were right. Though there's no denying that audiences have become decidedly savvier to the tricks of the genre in the decade between these two movies, Paranormal Activity nevertheless felt like a horror film for the YouTube generation, especially with the characters' obsessive focus on self-documentation as they investigate a possible supernatural presence in their home. Though most rational viewers will eventually appreciate the increasingly reality-breaking set pieces to be acts of artifice, for a great deal of its runtime, the minimalism on offer, defined by ambient creaking noises and subtle movements in the frame, is eerily relatable to anyone staying up in the early hours. 6. Poltergeist. To be clear, Tobe Hooper's 1982 horror masterpiece Poltergeist is not a found footage film or a mockumentary. It is an actual piece of typical narrative horror filmmaking. So whilst nobody watching believed it was real in a documentary style, the story surrounding Poltergeist's production has nevertheless made it the most believably cursed horror film in history. The curse is largely centered on the unexpected deaths of 2 young actors from the original movie in the years that followed. 22-year-old Dominique Dunne, who played the Freeling's daughter Dana, was strangled to death by her ex-boyfriend mere months after the film's release. And 12-year-old Heather O'Rourke, who played Carol Ann in all 3 films, died of a bowel obstruction several months before Poltergeist 3's premiere. The urban legend surrounding the curse only grew in more recent years, when it was revealed that the crew used real skeletons for the sequence in which Diane Freeling is dragged into the family's swimming pool and encounters a bunch of skeletons. Whilst conventional logic of the world around us says that these happenings were nothing more than a spooky coincidence, that doesn't stop many fans from believing the curse to be true. 5. The Last Broadcast. The Last Broadcast is a found footage mockumentary released the year prior to the Blair Witch Project, and though certainly lacking the same scrappy commitment to plausibility as its successor, it is nevertheless a deeply unsettling piece of filmmaking. The film investigates the murder of a TV crew who head into New Jersey's Pine Barrens in order to hunt down the mythic creature known as the Jersey Devil. It thrives on the strength of its authentic lo-fi documentary style, taking full advantage of its minimal resources to muster an all-encompassing eerie atmosphere. Though the film was widely criticized for its twist ending, which lifts the mockumentary veil for a shocking meta twist, everything leading up to that point was a shockingly persuasive piece of investigative journalism. 4. Ghostwatch. On Halloween night 1992, the BBC broadcast the exceptionally well-crafted TV movie Ghostwatch, which presented itself as a legitimate new-style investigation of a supposedly haunted English house. The film's success is largely a result of its production values, which feel entirely consistent with what audiences expected from actual BBC news broadcasts. The film cuts between studio footage of well-known BBC presenter Michael Parkinson and a supposedly live broadcast from the house itself, where an assortment of increasingly bone-rattling scares take place. Aided by the extremely strong performances of the central cast and a faultless presentation, the BBC ended up receiving 30,000 phone calls from distressed viewers, causing a tabloid wildfire in the days that followed. Ghostwatch was so effective that the Beeb refused to re-air or release it on home video for an entire decade, and in the years since, its esteem has grown as one of the most ingenious blurrings of fact and fiction in TV history. 3. Guinea Pig 2, Flower of Flesh and Blood. The Japanese Guinea Pig franchise is infamous for its revoltingly realistic depictions of torture and murder, framed as found footage intended to document the extent to which human beings can tolerate pain. The series remained controversial throughout its 6-movie run, but never more so than with the release of 1985's Guinea Pig 2, Flower of Flesh and Blood. Though the sequel was directed by Hideshi Hino and adapted from his own manga, the sequences of a woman being drugged, kidnapped, and dismembered by a psychotic samurai were nevertheless deemed horrifyingly believable, enough so to get the attention of the FBI. The film was investigated by the FBI after, out of all people, Charlie Sheen brought it to their attention, thinking that it was a snuff film that depicted real murder. The authorities eventually dropped their investigation after viewing a making-of documentary confirming the contents to be fabricated, but even so, it's easy to see why Sheen felt compelled to contact them. Given that Guinea Pig 2 could easily pass muster as a terrifying real snuff film today, almost 3 decades ago, there was far less of a reason to be skeptical. 2. The Blair Witch Project. The legacy of the Blair Witch Project truly cannot be underestimated. Released in 1999, it's largely accepted to be the father of modern-day found-footage film. It followed 3 student filmmakers, Heather, Michael, and Joshua, as they headed into the Burkittsville, Maryland woods to investigate the mythical Blair Witch. For audiences of the time, the Blair Witch Project represented a practically unfathomable level of gritty authenticity. From the highly believable trio of actors, the rough-hewn digital camera work, and highly minimalist approach to scares, everything slotted into place to make the end result just believable enough. Aiding things immeasurably was the movie's ingenious marketing campaign, focused on a website that claimed that the cast members were missing for real, while the actors maintained a low profile ahead of the film's release. The film's ambiguity only makes it that much more believable as a piece of actual found footage, and arriving as it did shortly before internet adoption enjoyed a worldwide uptake, it was able to play its clever trick on the world largely unimpeded. 1. ANTRUM, the deadliest film ever made. ANTRUM is a mockumentary about a supposedly lost, cursed 1979 film which contains subliminal images and sounds. It's supposedly linked to the deaths of almost 90 people, apparently as a result of the secret messages coded within. The bulk of the so-called documentary is composed of ANTRUM itself, which the documentary crew receives a copy of, and though the resulting footage is undeniably unsettling, the true genius here is in so believably framing this mockumentary as an objective account of a supposedly real piece of lost media. This resulted in many social media users believing that 1979's ANTRUM is completely real, and ultimately speculating on whether or not the movie's subliminal messaging, which largely consists of signs and sigils, genuinely actually led to anyone's death. Though it's ultimately a well-executed gimmick above all else, it's impressively effective for such a modern movie, especially with regard to the period detail and grotty visuals of the ANTRUM faux film itself. And with that, we've reached the end of this list of 10 horror movies that were scarier for making you think they were real. Did you fall for any of these? Don't worry, we won't judge. Let us know in the comments down below. And remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. As always, I've been Amy from What Culture, and I'll catch you next time.